the truth is very different from what most people think. Harry Houdini. He wasn't just a magician, he was also a hunter of lies. Did you know he didn't drown after getting trapped in a water tank during a performance, and that he spent a huge part of his life exposing scams involving the supernatural? He escaped from chains, safes, prisons, even boxes thrown into rivers. But at the height of his fame, something simple, almost trivial, started destroying him from the inside. And this time, there was no trick that could save him. Here's a man who turned danger into a spectacle and made the impossible his personal brand, a name that became synonymous with escape, control, and invincibility. But behind that image, there was a growing obsession and an increasingly risky relationship with his own limits. Who was Harry Houdini, really? How did he build his legend? Why did he go to war against the supernatural? And what really led to his death? Born on March 24, 1874 in Budapest, Hungary, as Eric Weiss, Houdini immigrated to the United States as a child with his family, who settled in Appleton, Wisconsin. The son of a rabbi, he grew up in what was initially a stable environment until his father lost his position and the family fell into financial hardship. That moment left a deep mark on his life. As a young teenager, he had to take on all kinds of jobs to help out at home: shoe shine boy, salesman, factory worker. That early exposure to struggle and survival shaped something that would stay with him forever: an obsession with success, money, and recognition. But one specific moment changed everything. As a teenager, after watching a magic show, Houdini had his first real encounter with what felt like the impossible. That mix of fear, fascination, and curiosity sparked something in him that would define his entire life. Inspired by the French magician Jean Robert Houdin, he adopted the stage name Houdini and started performing while still a teenager. In the beginning, his acts were simple, not very impressive, and didn't bring in much money. But there was something different about him. He studied obsessively every trick, every mechanism, every tiny detail. The turning point came when he realized something crucial. It wasn't enough to do magic, you had to create a spectacle. Houdini started challenging police officers to lock him up in public, drawing crowds, and when he managed to escape right in front of everyone, his name started spreading. That was the birth of a formula he would use for the rest of his life: danger plus spectacle plus media. He didn't just perform tricks, he created events. He controlled the narrative, planted challenges, attracted journalists, and little by little, he turned himself into an international phenomenon. By the early 1900s, Houdini was already world famous. His acts involved escaping from chains, safes, prisons, and even boxes submerged in water. In one of his most famous stunts, he would be locked inside a crate and thrown into a river, only to emerge free in front of thousands of spectators. He also appeared in films, portraying characters that carried the same image he projected on stage: heroism, illusion, escapism, and mystery. But there was a crucial detail. Even though it looked supernatural, it was all technique. Physical strength, body control, and an incredible mastery of mechanisms and locks. Houdini wasn't a man with superpowers. He was a master of total control over his own body and the audience's perception. But over time, that drive to push further started escalating. Handcuffs were no longer enough. He moved on to increasingly dangerous stunts: straitjacket escapes while hanging upside down, escapes from submerged crates, extreme challenges that put his life at real risk. And it wasn't just about the show. There was something deeper going on. Houdini seemed to have a strange relationship with danger, almost as if he was constantly testing his own limits, like he needed to prove over and over again that he was invincible. But that same mind that created illusions also turned against other illusionists, especially those who claimed to have supernatural powers. In his later years, Houdini began actively fighting mediums, spiritualists, and anyone claiming to have supernatural powers. But here's where things get interesting. Even as a declared skeptic, Houdini carried a deep pain, the loss of his mother. And with that loss came a quiet, unspoken doubt. What if someone really could bring a message from her? He wrote books, gave lectures, and publicly exposed these phenomena. To him, it was all just tricks, and he knew exactly how those tricks worked. That tension between skepticism and hope created one of the most intense periods of his life. One of the most famous friendships destroyed by this obsession was his relationship with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of the legendary detective Sherlock Holmes. Houdini was a skeptic who exposed fraudulent mediums. Doyle, on the other hand, was a firm believer in psychic powers. He even believed Houdini himself had them. The mutual admiration they once had, Doyle admiring Houdini's abilities and Houdini respecting Doyle's intellect, came to an end in 1922. Their friendship collapsed after a séance where Doyle's wife Jean tried to contact Houdini's deceased mother. Houdini knew the message was fake. Jean wrote it in English, a language his mother didn't speak, and it included Christian crosses, even though his mother was Jewish. And it was right at this moment, at the height of his fame, surrounded by enemies and constantly pushing his limits, that something started to go wrong. The man who could escape anything was about to face something he couldn't escape, his own mortality. For years, a popular version of Houdini's death spread around, that he drowned, unable to escape from a water tank during a performance. That image was reinforced by movies and ended up stuck in the public imagination. But the truth is very different. In October 1926, in Montreal, what seemed like a simple encounter set off a fatal chain of events. A student named J. Gordon Whitehead approached Houdini and asked him a direct question. Was it true that he could withstand any blow to the abdomen? Houdini said yes and allowed him to test it. The problem was, Houdini wasn't ready. He was lying down, his body relaxed, and didn't have time to brace his muscles. Whitehead then threw several punches into his abdomen. The blows caused immediate pain, far more intense than expected. Even so, Houdini did what he always did. He ignored it. He kept working, kept performing, kept pushing his body past its limits. As the days went by, the pain got worse, the fever rose, and his condition started to deteriorate quickly. Houdini was on tour. By the time he reached the Garrick Theater in Detroit, he was already showing serious symptoms, a high fever between 102 and 104 degrees Fahrenheit, around 39 to 40 degrees Celsius. Even then, as always, he insisted on going on stage. Before that performance in Detroit, a doctor examined him and gave a clear diagnosis: acute appendicitis. The recommendation was immediate, urgent surgery. Houdini refused. He went on stage, performed part of the show, and only stopped when his body literally couldn't take it anymore, forcing him to let his assistant finish the performance. Even then, Houdini resisted going to the hospital. It was only after a lot of insistence, especially from his wife, that he finally agreed to seek treatment. By the time he got to the hospital, it was already critical. The final diagnosis: peritonitis caused by a ruptured appendix. At the time, it was believed that the punches had directly caused the rupture. Even his insurance company treated it as the cause of the accident. But later analyses suggest something different. It's more likely that Houdini already had appendicitis when he was hit, and that the pain from the punches masked how serious the condition really was. In other words, he may have ignored the real warning signs, thinking they were just the result of the blows. And that changed everything. Because back then, before antibiotics, a ruptured appendix was almost always fatal if not treated quickly. Houdini underwent emergency surgery, but it was too late. He held on for a few days in the hospital until he died on October 31st, 1926, at the age of 52. And that brings up an unavoidable question. What really killed Houdini? The punches, the appendicitis, or the decision to ignore his own body? Maybe the answer lies in how he lived. Houdini built his entire life on challenging limits, ignoring pain, turning risk into spectacle. And in the end, he did the exact same thing. Only this time, there was no escape. But the story doesn't end here, because even after his death, Houdini still had one last trick planned. And that trick involved something he spent his entire life trying to expose: the supernatural. Did he pull it off? This is Houdini's final paradox. The man who spent his last years proving that mediums were frauds made a promise before he died. He told his wife Bess that if it were possible to communicate from the other side, he would do it. They came up with a secret code, words that only the two of them knew. The idea was simple. If any supernatural message came through with those exact words, it would be proof it was real. For years, Bess tried. She attended seances, consulted mediums, waited for a sign. But it never came. 10 years after Houdini's death, in 1936, she made one last attempt, with no success, so she declared the experiment a failure. Since then, countless attempts have been made by others, especially on Halloween, the date of Houdini's death. None have ever produced a convincing result. And that leads to an unavoidable reflection. Houdini spent his life proving that the impossible could be explained, that there was no magic, only technique, that there was no supernatural, only illusion. But in the end, he left behind a question with no clear answer. What if? What if, even after exposing everything, there was still something beyond? Was his final promise just one more illusion? Maybe Houdini's greatest trick wasn't escaping chains, safes, or water tanks. Maybe it was something much simpler and much more powerful: being remembered. Because more than a century later, his name still carries the same weight: the man who could escape anything except his own mortality. Want to hear more random facts that might change your life? Or not? Follow us here and on our other socials. Everything's down below in the video description. Also, drop a like, leave a comment telling us what you thought about the video and what you want to see next. And don't forget to share this with someone you think will enjoy it too.